a long way from the city, too far away to have volcanic debris land on it, even less likely to be embedded in walls. And the volcano, when it erupts, chooses 5 cities separated by sometimes 30 or 40 kilometers to deposit its contents on. Volcanic debris stays local to the volcano. It doesn't jump over huge areas, leaving them untouched. And it doesn't choose the element of sulfur out of its lava to fireballs into walls at high velocity. The chances of volcanic action doing all these things is very remote. Finally, Andy came up with a test result that he could accept.
Yeah, it's a little bit lower than the standard, so I would say 94% sulfur.
Perhaps the samples Simon brought were too pure for the extremes of the X-ray apparatus to read. The group visited other establishments, including the British Museum, in their quest for answers. As can be expected, there are differences of opinion.
I mean, I think what I'm saying is that the overall structure that you see here is completely natural, is a geological formation.
Basically.
Okay, that's again, it looks very odd, but it's a natural formation. And it's caused by a combination of water erosion, but also wind as well. As you've probably realised, it can get very windy in that area as well. It's almost a sandblasted effect.
Jonathan suggested that an industrial accident might explain the presence of the sulfur balls.
When undoubtedly these industries were being conducted, certainly bitumen processing was being conducted around the shores of the Dead Sea. Maybe sulfur processing too. But if you have a processing industry, let's say, at a place like Babadra or Numair, one of these places on the shore of the Dead Sea, and the thing goes up in flames, then you're going to have a pretty cataclysmic destruction with sulfur balls flying all over the place.
Yes.
And so to have these things raining down is not, therefore, surprising.
Again, however, this begs the same question. How did the explosion spread the distance that it did? And why was it so selective in its choice of where it deposited its fallout? Or what is the likelihood of 5 separate locations experiencing identical disasters? There are 5 locations in the world where these sulfur balls are to be found. Nowhere else. Simon believes these are the cities of the plain.
I find it very interesting, Simon, that we've actually come across this now in our day, that you've been down there, you've come across Sodom and Gomorrah, you've found the ruined cities, as others perhaps have done in the past. But now today, to actually see them is like a visible example of God's judgment. It's not like you can just read your Bible and say, well, maybe it happened, maybe it didn't. You know, those of us who believe our Bible, of course, we believe it did happen. But somebody perhaps watching will say, well, maybe it did, maybe it didn't, who cares? Well, now you've got visible evidence. You've got those incredible sulfur balls that I think shot off the scale when they had the scientific analysis. And you've got the actual ruins that you've walked around and you've seen. And folks who've watched the DVD have seen these things. There's no excuse for saying it didn't happen. This is the visible evidence. Now, Jesus warned that judgment in the last days would come, just prior to his return. Judgment would fall upon the earth, that God would judge the earth for their sinfulness, just as he judged Sodom and Gomorrah for their sinfulness. You know, God is a just judge. If he doesn't judge the world, people have said he will have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. So what you're seeing now is a repeat, when God is saying, look, here are the ruins, here are the actual sites. Judgment came then, judgment will come again. Jesus warned us in Luke 17 that as it was in the days of Lot, so will it be in the coming of the days of the Son of Man. When Jesus returns again, judgment will fall. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. 2 Peter 2:6 says that these are examples to us. Jude says these are examples to us, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And now to have them here, visible before us, is astounding.
So, drawing from all of the resources we have used, what have we discovered about this story? That in 5 distinct locations, 5 ashen cities exist that are identified in the Syrian tablets discovered in Ebla, described by the historian Josephus in AD 75, where we find the same patterns of architecture, the same composition of ashen walls, that in each of these places, hundreds of thousands of balls of sulfur are present, which, when we have them meticulously analyzed, yield a purity level as high or possibly higher than any form of the element known to man. That it would appear there is nowhere else on the planet that such samples exist, to the point where eminent scientists and specialists who know all about their subject admit that they have never seen anything like them. That natural disasters like volcanic activity or industrial accidents fail to explain adequately the baked ash, or the hundreds of thousands of sulfur missiles burning at temperatures that cannot be calculated with modern machinery, that have been embedded in walls and sprayed around the close proximity of these 5 cities, so selectively that no trace of them exists in the terrain in between the 5 sites whatsoever, and above all, that a detailed description of the events, the locations, the substances, and the reasons why this all happened exists in the Bible that we hold in our hands today, that fits together perfectly in the minutest detail, endorsed by clay tablets as clear as the Dead Sea Scrolls' first-century historians and scientific research of the 3rd millennium. Then perhaps it's time to accept such overwhelming evidence not as a myth, but unquestionable reality. But we aren't quite finished yet. There may be one further ingredient, even more fantastic and arresting to consider. We return for a moment to Sodom, just before Simon's party left. The minibus hadn't returned. The Bible story of Lot's wife came to mind.
Remember, do not look back or you will be consumed.
Suddenly, looking towards the direction of Zoar, where they had been earlier that day, something caught Simon's eye. He reached for his camera and took a shot. Facing Sodom, back toward Zoar. First-century historian Josephus had this to say in his first book of the Antiquities of the Jews, chapter 11, paragraph 4, verses 22 and 23. But Lot's wife, continually turning back to view the city as she went from it, and being too nicely inquisitive what would become of it, although God had forbidden her so to do, was changed into a pillar of salt. For I have seen it, and it remains at this day.
Into this cave, quickly!
the cities have been preserved. Has she